Good morning. My name is Donna Marie Collins. I'm the hearing examiner that will be presiding over today's zoning hearing. The case is Sunniland Town Center CPD. It's an amendment to an existing CPD to change the development parameters. All testimony and evidence I accept during these hearings will be taken under oath. Therefore, at the conclusion of my remarks, I will administer the oath to everyone in the room en masse, so I don't have to swear everybody in as you approach the podium. The order of proceedings will be as follows. First, the applicant will present their case. They are representatives of the property owner or contract purchaser. They are the ones making the request to change the development parameters of this project. Their testimony will include probably several witnesses with different areas of expertise, and their job will be to demonstrate how the request complies with the LEED plan and the land development code. In those documents are the review criteria that I'm bound by when I consider this amendment. At the conclusion of their presentation, we typically go to staff, but I understand that staff's presentation will be this afternoon because one of their expert witnesses is not available to this afternoon. And because of that, I will allow members of the public that would like to speak this morning to speak at the conclusion of the applicant's presentation. You don't have to speak at that time, but if you speak at that time, you will not get a second opportunity to speak later this afternoon at the conclusion of staff's presentation. I offer this as an accommodation for those who maybe have taken off of work and feel as though they can't stay the whole day. Regarding public testimony, each member of the public that comes, I ask that you come to the podium, state your name, explain to us what your specific concerns are with the project. It's my experience with large projects like this that contemplate a number of uses that people are not completely opposed or totally in favor. They have very specific concerns. If you express them to us, you allow us an opportunity to provide further clarification or to craft conditions that might address those specific concerns. Each member of the public will have only one chance to speak, so I ask that you please organize your remarks before you come to the podium, because in the interest of keeping the hearing moving forward, I can't allow people to say, oh, and another thing and another thing. We keep going from there. During public input, that is your time to ask questions. We will note all questions asked, and then we will circle back after all members of the public have spoken to address those questions. We find that this works better because sometimes people ask the same question, but if you're waiting your turn, you don't always listen to what the person before you is saying and the response to it, so that's how we handle that. Because of the nature of this amendment, I am not the final decision maker, but I will be taking in all testimony and evidence, and I will be preparing a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners. That recommendation is a public record, which is available to you. You can access it online, or if you wish to provide your email address or mailing address, if you don't have an email address, we will forward you a copy of that recommendation. You will also receive notification of the final board hearing via the method of contact you provided to us. When the board has their final hearing, they will be accepting no new testimony or evidence. You may speak to the matters that you brought up during this hearing, and you may point to any errors you think are in my recommendation that they should consider in their decision-making process. So I encourage you to participate in today's hearing, because if members of the public don't participate at this level, they do not have an opportunity to address the board during the final decision-making process. All right, I think that's everything. So I'm going to administer the oath today. If you intend to speak regarding this case, I ask that you please raise your right hand. You swear or affirm the testimony and evidence you give today will be the truth?
Yes, ma'am.
I do.
Okay, thank you. I'm ready to begin.
Can I ask a question procedurally before we begin?
Sure.
I do appreciate the fact that we have June dates. I'd very dearly like to finish today.
As would I.
I'm assuming the staff has more than one witness. Can the staff start in the morning And wait for the witness that can't come till this afternoon?
That's up to staff.
I mean, we can. It's transportation.
I figured it might be.
Yeah. So, I mean, I can start. That's not a problem. And then think about your testimony in between.
Right, and I just want to say, you're only going to get one opportunity to speak public. So if your concerns are related to transportation, you might be better off waiting until this afternoon to speak.
Do you have a time frame on when they are coming? Like, do we have it so that we?
Is it 1 o'clock, do we know?
I believe it is 1. I believe so.
1 o'clock. And I don't know any idea how long their testimony is? Half
It-
hour, 45 minutes?
I'm going to say half hour. I don't even think it's that long.
Just to, I'm going to offer the opportunity to speak this morning, if there is time this morning after they've made their presentations, for those who are not able to stay. But I encourage you to try to wait till you can hear all the testimony before you do speak. And because what will happen is during the transportation presentation, there'll be discussion on how the existing approval trip generation compares with what is proposed today. And that can be very helpful in putting impacts into perspective. Any other questions?
No.
I didn't know that you weren't already aware when they contacted me. I thought this had already been shared.
No, it had not. It all happened this morning.
And at 8:30 is when they came to me and said, not all the witnesses are going to be present in the morning. So I said, that's fine, they can go in the afternoon. But
No, I didn't know, so I just wanted to kind of, and we do want to try to finish today, but with that, in the
and
interest
I
of.
have a question before you start.
Okay.
What is the cutoff date for a case to make it to the board before their summer recess? Do you know what that is?
No, but I can find out from
Okay, before the end of hearing today?
of course I can, yeah.
Because if I can, I will try to render my recommendation so that there's an opportunity for the final hearing before the board takes their summer break.
We appreciate that very much.
Now I'm ready to begin.
With that, we call Mr. Dan DeLisi, who's been qualified and accepted as an expert previously.
Let me just check my stuff while we're at it
You?
here. No, it was not me. I swear, I'm sworn in. I just turned it off. It was a reminder for me. Thank you.
Yes, please silence your cell phone. And if you need to take a call, that's fine with me. Please just step out and you'll be allowed to come back in.
Okay, so for the record, my name is Dan DeLisi. I've testified in this forum on many occasions. So I'll get started. I'm going to talk about the planning aspects of the case, most of the criteria for approval, the compatibility, consistency with the comp plan, all of that. Afterwards, Paul Owen, the ecologist, is going to talk about environmental aspects of the site and the code violation. So you have more details on that, how it's being remediated and how the amendment is going to fulfill the requirements of that.
Okay, good, because I would like greater detail on the timing of how this gets accomplished.
Yeah. So before you ask me those questions, just know Paul's coming up.
I'm going to
he's
wait,
the guy.
yes.
Yes. Brent Addison will then come up and talk about stormwater and utilities, and then Ted will discuss transportation. And then we can go through the 48-hour memo. I don't think our presentation is going to take too much more than, if even, an hour. So we should be done fairly quickly. But if you'd like me to talk slow to fill up the morning. All right, so the subject property is 33.3 acres on the north side of Lee Boulevard. You can see some obvious characteristics of it. It's about a half a mile west of Sunshine Boulevard. It's bisected by Sunniland. Sunniland, I think it's road, not boulevard, but anyways. And it's adjacent to Sunshine Elementary School. We're in the central urban future land use category. I'll talk more about that later, but you can see what the general design for the area is. Lehigh Acres is predominantly urban community. It's a lot of quarter-acre lots, just all over the place. That's how it was platted. But Lee Boulevard, there's clear intent to make it more of a highly urban area. And so the designation of urban community on both sides kind of lends to that character that you see along Lee Boulevard, or the desire for that future development of character. As you had mentioned before, this is an existing planned development. It was zoned in 2006 for 232,000 square feet of commercial, both retail and office. It was also designed to allow for the continuation of oil well, which was on site. So you can see the existing master concept plan. It was pretty detailed, much more detailed than the proposed, which is part of the reason for this amendment. The oil well remained, and the retail and commercial uses were to be constructed around the oil well. You know, of course, Sunniland is bisecting the project, but that was how it was previously designed. There was a condition in the existing zoning that required the capping of the oil well once it ceased production, and it did cease production. The oil well was capped. And
How long ago was the oil well capped?
oh gosh, I have those records. I would have to look them up. I know
I'd
we
be
submitted
interested
them.
in having that.
I want to say it's been a couple years, but I'll look for that and I'll come back with that.
And also, may I have a paper copy of your PowerPoint?
This is
And also
the
for
second
the
time.
court reporter?
Second time in a row I've done that.
This is applicant Exhibit 1.
Thank you.
So the proposed amendment relocates the preserve areas, remediates the code violation, loosens up the master concept plan. So now we have out parcels along Lee Boulevard and 2 anchor parcels, one on the west side and one on the east side. We've relocated the preserve areas, and so this area along the north, both preserve and dry detention area, acts as a nice natural buffer to the residential to the north. So the request now is for 265,000 square feet of commercial and 100,000 square feet of self-storage, or 100,000 square feet of commercial, 100,000 square feet of self-storage, and 300 residential units. And the residential units would be placed on this eastern anchor parcel. So the intent is for a smaller anchored retail development on the west, a larger on the east or multifamily, and then again out parcels along Lee Boulevard. So section 34-145 is the criteria for approval for planned developments. I'm going to go through, as I said, several of these and then hand it over to other experts that'll go through the rest. So the first is consistency with the comprehensive plan. As I said before, we're in the central urban future land use category, which is defined in policy 1.1.3 of the Lee plan. And it's characterized as the urban core of Lee County. So the idea is more intensive commercial uses, higher densities of residential development, and that again, you see how it's kind of located along both the north and south sides of Lee Boulevard. The property is also within the mixed-use overlay on map 1C of the Lee plan, the future land use map series. And that creates incentives for even more increased intensity on a property. And the way the incentives work is both a density incentive, which I'll talk about in a little bit, as well as incentives in the land development code to concentrate intensity at these locations. Objectives 2.1 and 2.2 talk about development, location and development timing. As you were able to see on the aerial, the property is an infill property. There's development on all sides of the property. There are utilities and public services all around. And so the property fills in an area that is currently, if you go out on site, it's a blighted property. It's a vacant lot in the midst of an urban area. And so there are all sorts of things that trash needs to be cleaned up, et cetera. I mean, it's a vacant lot. It needs to be maintained. This property is well located for future development to enhance what's going on along the corridor. There is, in policy 5.1.3, there's locational criteria for higher densities of residential use. Being within the mixed use overlay, you would expect that this is a good area for residential uses and higher density of residential uses just because of what's going on along Lee Boulevard. There are a lot of commercial uses, and the policy specifically talks to employment centers, access to transit, and proximity to schools. And we're, as I said before, immediately adjacent to Sunshine Elementary School. We're along a bus route that runs along Lee Boulevard, and there are commercial uses all along Lee Boulevard that provide an employment base for people. Policy 6.1.1 and all of Goal 6 talks about commercial evaluation criteria. 6.1.1 are the evaluation criteria. That includes traffic impacts, buffering, public services, proximity to similar centers. We're consistent with all of these. We're not asking for any deviations from the buffering requirements or open space. Public services are all available. Ted will talk about transportation impacts. We're consistent with policy 6.1.1. 6.1.4, there's a lot of overlap. Again, urban services are available to the site, and I'll talk about compatibility in a couple slides from now. Policy 25.6.1 is the Lehigh Commercial Overlay. That's incorrect. We're entirely within the Lehigh Commercial Overlay. The Lehigh Commercial Overlay was to designate existing commercial sites in Lehigh Acres and encourage that commercial be developed on those. What the policy says is that commercial is allowed and so is residential, but not platted single-family lots. So anything that provides a diversity of residential within the community. And so what the policy is trying to get at is essentially anything but single-family lots. So commercial, multifamily residential are all specifically called out as uses that make sense within the commercial overlay.
So this property, was it ever platted for single-family development, or was it always set aside as, large tracts perhaps for schools, libraries, parks, commercial employment centers, or what have you?
I'm not sure if it was ever platted. Someone else may know the history of it. If you drive out on site, there is, decaying infrastructure on the site. In other words, you could see where the roads were platted, and this road here, 5th Avenue or 5th Street, runs right through it and is still there. I believe this road is there and falling apart.
It really just looked like a dirt path once you got past that first
Yeah.
intersection.
Yeah. So at some point it may have been and then replatted, but I mean, the way it looks now is the infrastructure was put in place if, you know, so I don't know the history of all of that.
Yeah, I do know, just for the record, that there was a vacation in 1995, 96 timeframe. So I believe some of it was platted and then was vacated. I can provide you that information if you need it.
I was just trying to determine if from the beginning it was intended to serve as a commercial employment center of some kind, based on its centrality to the Lehigh community. And the fact that it's not broken up into single-family platted lots like everything around it, that's all. It's not that important. I mean, it's been zoned for commercial since 2006. I was just curious.
Yep. And, you know, I do want to, going back to that point, again, if you look at the policy, the goal of the policy, of course, is to preserve and develop commercial spaces, but also make sure you allow for a diversity of housing type. So if you have, you know, I mean, it's hard to aggregate lots and develop multifamily on a big platted area. So to the extent that you have something where you can create a condo development, those areas are, I mean, you could just look at the aerial and there aren't a lot of places where you'd be able to do that either. So the county created the mixed use overlay for, you know, that reason, hopefully to encourage mixed use development or something that would create more activity centers, if you will. You know, more commercial, but more relationship between residential and commercial and interconnectivity between those uses. Objective 11.2 is the mixed use overlay, which I talked about just prior. But 11.2.7 specifically deals with how you evaluate density within the mixed use overlay. And so this allows you to take density from the entire property and utilize that for your density calculation rather than segregate the residential areas and the commercial areas and only take density from the residential portion of the development. So we're requesting a potential of 300 units, and the total land area is 33.3 acres. The central urban future land use category allows for up to 10 units an acre, standard density. So we're well within that density range. Policy 25.6.1, as I mentioned before, was the commercial overlay. We just talked about that. And then policy 25.10.1 encourages new development to locate preserve areas on site or within the Lehigh Acres community rather than mitigate outside of the community. So the idea of that policy is to keep as much vegetation within the community as possible. And we are slightly exceeding our indigenous vegetation requirement, the way we're relocating the preserves, the replanting, and everything that Paul will talk about, and the total acreage is slightly in excess of what the requirement would be. Surrounding uses and compatibility. One notable aspect of this property, just in general, I want to point out are the Lamsid canals, the Lehigh Acres Municipal Service Improvement District, Lamsid canals on both the north, and then there's also one which is less pronounced on the west of the site. They act as natural setbacks at least. So to the north, you do have residential properties, single-family units, zoned RS1. They're separated by the Lamsid Canal. To the south, you have Lee Boulevard, and then there's a mix of uses along Lee Boulevard. Some residential RS1, some commercial, There's CPD and CS1 zoning here and commercial uses. You can see Sunshine Elementary School is to the east, and then commercial along Lee Boulevard to the east.
If the developer exercises the option to build multifamily on the site, I noticed there wasn't a condition that required an interconnect, pedestrian interconnect between the parcels. Is that something that's been explored with staff or the school board? It seems like it would go a long way toward reducing traffic impacts, you know.
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't come up. I think the school board would need to create that opening. I've seen it done before, but it's,
No, I'm just saying, school boards, elementary schools are highly fenced and secure these days, so that would have to be a discussion.
I seem to recall some lead plan policies to that effect, but that's okay. I was just curious.
and then Sunniland bisects the property, as I mentioned before. I will note on the west side here, this RS1 area with the platted lots, it's all a Lamsid park. It's not residential units, nor will it be. So the residential units are unbuilt here, and then there are some existing over here. But the residential really starts once you get north of 5th, as does, well.
And what is the condition of the bridge on the north side? I did do my site visit prior to this hearing, but it didn't seem as though Sunniland was navigable safely, you know, in my car in the condition it was in, so I wasn't able to. Is the intention to improve that connection? What's the state of that connection?
I'll defer that to Ted.
Ted, okay.
I mean, I drove it last week, and I mean, it's 2 lanes, but other than that, I wasn't scared going across the bridge. So I do expect that there is traffic. The residential units to the north use this regularly. Staff has conditioned buffers consistent with the adjacent uses in the mixed-use overlay. You know, we're not asking for any deviations. Again, I'll point out though that we've located our dry detention and our preserve at the north end of the site, which creates a nice natural buffer to the uses to the north. And it also makes sense as what Brent will talk about, the drainage patterns on the site. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Paul, who will talk about the environment.
Okay, just before you sit down, did you say there was no deviations?
There is one deviation, and that is the replanting. So the deviation request is from the indigenous preserve requirement to allow us to use replanting to suffice the requirement.
So did you withdraw deviation 2, which was the wall condition?
So deviation, yeah, it's a little confusing. I think that was deviation 1 or 3. We withdrew that because it's not the applicable buffer requirement.
Right, deviation 1 was withdrawn, but I see still 2 deviations. And deviation 2 was from the requirement to provide a 25-foot buffer with a wall when vehicular pavement is proposed within 125 feet of residentially zoned parcel, and then this would apply to the western boundary. So is that still?
That's withdrawn.
That's withdrawn as well. So we're down to 1 deviation?
1 deviation, yes. And for whatever reason, and I'll have to look back at the evolution of this, but we're calling that deviation, deviation 2, the 1 deviation that remains. And
Not deviation 1, since that's the only deviation that remains?
I need to look back at the evolution of it, but that would be a good suggestion.
But we digress.
Yes. But yes, there is only 1 deviation being requested.
Good morning.
So, my name is Paul Owen with Owen Environmental Consulting. I'm the project environmental consultant. I have been accepted as expert witness in this forum several times in the fields of wildlife and listed species, and request to be accepted as such.
Yes, please proceed.
Thank you. So I was going to start off with the surrounding properties, but Dan has covered that very well, but it is very germane to the environmental aspects of this, in that it is surrounded, this property is surrounded by a canal and a road and development. It has roads, a major road running through the middle of it. It's got roads inside it. So that is very important when you consider the environmental aspects of this property. The site contains disturbed pine flatwoods, willow wetlands, disturbed lands, spoil areas, and cleared areas, which are all infested by varying degrees of exotic vegetation. There's approximately 30.4 acres of uplands and 3.2 acres of state-only jurisdictional wetlands. I don't think they're going to be considered federally jurisdictional wetlands because they don't connect. If there will be any impacts to the South Florida Water Management District jurisdictional wetland, there's two, here and here, then the applicant will obtain the appropriate ERP permit and will provide mitigation which meets county code. So during our protected species survey, we found 28 potentially occupied gopher tortoise burrows scattered across the site. A Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission gopher tortoise permit will be obtained to relocate any affected gopher tortoises to a Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission approved recipient site if any disturbances or development will be within 25 feet of any burrow. And that seems likely that these tortoises will be relocated off-site. And in my professional opinion...
How does that work?
Okay, and I just did this yesterday. So first of all, you have to be an agent with the Game Commission. You have to. It's quite a process to become an agent and qualified. It's like a license, more or less, to be able to get the permits and relocate these tortoises. So you have to survey the property. You have to do a 100% survey. You have to submit a form online to get a permit. They'll issue the permit. You have to pay a mitigation fee. You have to pay the recipient site. I think they're usually in, there's one in Arcadia, there's a couple around, but they're in the middle of the state. They're these old agricultural fields that have been restored so that to allow for gopher tortoises to come back in. It's been rehabilitated habitat where there's not, tortoises are not many now, and so they're improving it. And so this is an area that will never be developed. It goes under conservation easement, and it's monitored excellent habitat. So the developer has to pay them. Right now, that fee is $5,000 per tortoise.
So you
it's
pay
no
to get,
small fee.
pay to get the permit,
Yes,
and then you pay the recipient site
yes,
to accept the tortoises.
exactly. And then we excavate them very carefully, transport them very carefully. This is all very tightly regulated, every little thing. And then you drop them off at the site, and they accept them, and all the paperwork is done. You write the after-action report, and it's all over.
Oh, you do it. You actually,
We do everything, start
Okay.
to finish. I subcontract the backhoe operator. We do everything. And yeah, there are a few. There's not every consultant does that.
all right, so 28 burrows were found on the site. There could be more or less tortoises, but before you do anything, you're going to do a 100% survey.
It's required to do one within 90 days of when you start to remove the tortoises. So if you do one like now, we did a 100% one, and they come in 6 months later, we're gonna have to do it again to make sure that no tortoises have moved in. So we have to know exactly where every burrow is. We have to get every single one of them that would be affected by the development. If it happens that there's a tortoise in the middle of the preserve, we'll probably leave it alone. Because it involves a little bit of disturbance to the habitat. So if you have to leave one, that's not a big deal.
Okay, thank you for explaining that.
So regarding the indigenous habitat, a total of 1.2 acres of existing indigenous habitat located, I'm just gonna mess this up. It's located right here. This is the indigenous habitat. It's pine flatwoods.
How
Yeah,
can
what's
you
the
just, for
button?
the record, when you say right here, just explain generally, so it shows up in writing where that's located?
Okay, so the existing indigenous habitat is located in the southeastern portion of the site, off of Lee Road by a few hundred feet. It consists of the pine flatwood, which will be preserved, and then there's 2.3 acres located in the north portion of the site, which is currently disturbed or cleared land. That was part of that violation. That's the restoration area. Those areas will be restored to be pine flatwood indigenous habitat. And the proposed preservation and restoration of indigenous habitats is provided to satisfy Land Development Code 10-415B, as the indigenous areas on site will be created as described in deviation question mark. I don't know which one or two, or both. Right, so within these restoration areas or preservation areas, there's some horticultural and garbage. That's going to all be removed first and be disposed of in an appropriate facility. Then all the exotic and nuisance vegetation will be removed from these areas. Any significant soil disturbances will be regraded within the restoration areas. After that, the restoration areas will be planted with 310 trees and 1,002 understory plants for the habitat restoration. That's to make it indigenous. And then, to abate for the violation, which I'll talk about next, there will be 711 trees planted as described in the Preservation Area Management Plan, which I believe is part of your record. It's all described in great detail.
So the abatement process involves planting extra trees than would ordinarily be necessary to develop this site. And the plan is to put these extra trees where?
In the restoration areas.
In the restoration
And
area.
that will just help provide greater density of vegetation and make it a better habitat, better community, more natural community. So, yeah, so the abatement is, I'll go through the abatement and the detail of that real quick here. So on January 19th, 2023, Lee County Enforcement issued 2 violations. The county staff had observed violations at those addresses on August 4th, 2021. There's approximately 13.62 acres of previously approved indigenous and Gopher Tortoise Preserve that have been cleared without a development order or clearing permits. So the preservation plan includes the replacement plantings to abate those 2 code violations for the removal of those trees without permits. And we work with staff, and this has all been worked out, and we're all in agreement on how this is going to go.
And those replantings are be concentrated in the restoration area along the north property line.
Correct. In these 2 areas right here. As these areas are today, they're either disturbed land, which is a lot of exotic vegetation. It's just kind of a mess. And this area was the area that was cleared as part of the violation. So it's just kind of an uneven, herbaceous, disturbed area. So they'll regrade it and replant it to make it into pine flatwoods. And then you had asked about the timing. So I'm going to run through that real quick. So prior to the replanting, a detailed restoration landscape plan will be submitted during the development order process. It'll show the planted materials, location, species, and the planting standards. Then a certificate of compliance will be obtained. So the proposed work schedule is that the debris removal, the exotic species control program, and the regrading will commence after the approval of the project's development order. The initial debris removal, exotic treatment, and regrading will be initiated during the first dry season following issuance of the required federal, state, and local authorizations. And it is anticipated that the initial treatment will be completed in less than 3 months after that. The restoration and replacement plantings will be initiated within approximately 2 to 3 months of the completion of the initial exotic removal, weather permitting. And this is directly read out of the restoration plan.
So essentially, that northern area will be restored and planted before development activity on the remainder of the site? Or
I'm not positive
concurrent?
exactly what the timing of, is the CC or
Well, I
how
think
that?
that's a discussion we're gonna have when we discuss the
Yeah.
condition.
Okay, and it's all been approved by staff, we're all in agreement about it, I just don't know the exact detail of
Okay,
it.
that's fine.
And so, these areas, the restoration and the preservation areas, they're gonna be monitored for 5 years, and then will be maintained free of exotics and in good shape thereafter.
Right, and that's a condition of your development order approval, so if that falls by the wayside, that would be addressed via the violation process.
Correct.
Okay, and what about the preserve area on the eastern edge of the property? Is restoration required there?
No, it's actually in pretty good shape. It does have some exotic vegetation, very little, like Brazilian pepper, maybe a melaleuca tree or two. Those will be removed.
Thank you.
And that concludes what I have as a presentation.
I'm ready for the next witness.
Good morning.
Good morning.
For the record, my name is Brent Addison, and I'm a registered engineer in the state of Florida with Atwell. And then today I'm here to talk to you about stormwater. So, has been discussed previously, the site is surrounded by canals. The larger canal, Angelfish Canal in the north, and then some relatively smaller drainage ditches on either side. And the drainage along Lee Boulevard is closed drainage, curb and gutter. It goes into a pipe network and then drains to the ditches on the side that go to the Angelfish Canal. So currently, the site is relatively flat. There's a few depressional areas that were mentioned by Paul that were the wetland areas. So some water will stage up in those areas, but overall, when water runs off of this site, it's going to go to the east, north, or west currently. So for the proposed design for the stormwater, we're going to have 2 independent systems, is at least how I see it going forward. When we get into detailed design, we'll determine that more. But 2 independent systems on either side of Sunniland. There'll be a system on the right-hand side that serves everything on the right-hand side and then goes to the dry detention area in the north. And then the same thing is going to happen on the left-hand side, the west side. There will be commercial development requires dry detention pretreatment, a half inch of dry pretreatment at a minimum. Right now, we're proposing this entire system is dry detention, so it would definitely meet the requirements of the water management district. There probably will be some other smaller dry detention areas scattered out depending on how the development is set up. We will be permitting through South Florida Water Management District and LAMCID. I mentioned about the current drainage. Again, because we're pretty much an island, we're not going to be affecting anybody else around us with respect to drainage. There's canals on all sides, and those canals are going to stay in place, and we won't be affecting those. Next slide. Did you have any questions on stormwater before I proceed?
No.
Okay. On the utilities, we've had contact with FGUA. As you can see in the top left-hand side, there are existing water and sewer improvements. There's a force main, that's the red one on the right-hand side, which is where we would connect to the sewer. And then there's a water main on the left-hand side, which is the blue one, which is, of course, where we would connect to water. Most likely there'll be a pump station designed for this system, probably to serve both sides of the community to be more efficient, and then the water will be routed through there for fire protection and potable service. We also have on the bottom of the slide a letter of availability from FGUA for water and sewer service. And that's all I have to present.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Ted Shreesh, TR Transportation Consultants. We prepared the traffic analysis for this application. I'd just like to go over that and give you a summary. The analysis looked at the trip generation for the two proposed master concept plans, and we looked at the trip generation for both MCPs, and then we did our analysis based on the highest trip generation, and that was based on MCP number 1 that had the 265,000 square feet of retail and 100,000 square feet of self-storage uses. That generates the most trips on the road network when compared to the option with the multifamily use due to the higher retail square footage contained on that master concept plan. So if in the end, if the multifamily is developed, ultimately, the ultimate trip generation will be much lower and the impacts will be lower than what we ultimately analyzed in this analysis. So this analysis submitted is the worst case in terms of the impacts this project can have. So as Dan and Brent explained, access to this project will be provided consistent with the previously approved zoning onto Sunniland, as well as to 5th Street, the parallel road to Lee Boulevard. There'll be no access directly to Lee Boulevard, which is the 6-lane arterial out front. The analysis looked at the level of service on the roadways. Again, as the hearing examiner is familiar, Lee County is no longer participating in transportation concurrency, so the level service analysis is more informative to the county in terms of informing the county where the roadways are in terms of level service and keeping track of the traffic volumes on the roadways. So it's more looking at the impacts of this project and what improvements are going to be needed as we proceed towards development. And as this project proceeds to the next steps in terms of development, another traffic study will have to be done. As a development order is applied for, the county requires another traffic study to look at what site-specific improvements are going to be needed, and I'll discuss that here in a moment. For this analysis, we looked at 2028. The county, for a rezoning, requires us to project out traffic conditions to look at the build-out conditions of the project in its entirety. We looked at the study network area, included Lee Boulevard, which is a 6-lane arterial roadway, Sunniland and 12th Street, our major collectors. Those right now are 2-lane roads. Sunshine Boulevard to our east is an 2-lane arterial. All those roadways will operate at level service C in 2028. Both with and without the project trips added to the network. The only roadway that was shown to operate at a poor level service was Gunnery Road, which is further to the west. It's not shown to have a significant impact due to our project, and that poor level service was shown prior to any development trips being added. So that was shown to have a poor level service in 2028, regardless if this zoning is approved or any trips from this project was added. So again, as I indicated, at the time of DO, there'll be site-specific improvements that are going to be required, turn lanes at the access drives. There'll be improvements that'll be done to Sunniland along the frontage of the project, turn lanes into the site access drives to accommodate left turns and right turns into the project. So Sunniland will be improved from its current condition. It won't stay in its current 2-lane condition. There'll be turn lanes that'll be provided at the access drives that'll safely accommodate those turning movements into and out of the project. We've had quite a number of discussions with Lee County DOT, and I'm sure we'll have those discussions later this afternoon when they come, regarding specifically the intersection of Lee Boulevard and Sunniland. With a project of this intensity, that intersection will most likely need to be signalized with this development if it's to be developed with any amount of commercial development. And even under the scenario with the multifamily project on 100,000 square feet of retail, a signal most likely will be required at that intersection, especially due to the 6-lane nature of Lee Boulevard and the traffic volumes that corridor currently carries and will continue to carry into the future. So one of the conditions that staff has recommended and we're in agreement with, it's just the language that I think we need to work on, and I think that's the reason that staff at DOT is showing up this afternoon, is the language of that agreement. And DOT is implementing these, what they call this traffic signalization agreements now at the time of zoning, is to work out the details of the signal at Lee and Sunniland, which we have no objection to. Obviously, the signal helps with commercial development and getting traffic into and out of Sunniland onto Lee Boulevard. That agreement will dictate when the signal goes in, who pays for the signal, which the developer will pay for the signal, the county doesn't pay for the signal, and what improvements specifically will go in at the intersection. There will be turn lane improvements that are going to be required at that intersection when that signal goes in. Again, we've had meetings with DOT to talk about the signalization. They're not objecting to a signal at that location. It does meet spacing criteria for a future signal.
And is it a full median opening at that location?
Yes, it is currently a full median opening. So I believe, and again, we're not objecting to the signalization agreement. It's just, I believe, the wording, how we, at this point, come to an agreement. There's several other projects.
So what is the wording that's troublesome right now? Is this something that can be worked out before this record is closed? Is it timing? What is it?
Well, the applicant in their letters, well, let's back up. The initial staff report didn't have the signal condition. Mr. Trees crafted the signal condition that's in the 48-hour letter. And after we had done that, then the staff sent an updated staff report that has a condition. I think
I'm going to go over that in my testimony because that
Okay.
timing's not correct.
All right, I'm just trying to figure out, is it a decision I'm gonna have to make, or is there a possibility that with further discussion between the parties, you can come to terms on
well, I think Ted
at least how the condition is drafted, you
Yeah.
know?
I think Ted will know better when he has a discussion with the witness this afternoon. I don't think they've had a chance to talk about it.
No, we haven't had a chance.
Okay,
I think we can come to an agreement. And the other condition that seems to be creeping into the staff reports and the conditions lately is regarding this condition regarding limiting the development. Do you have I don't have the letter.
Our letter?
It's the condition from, I believe
it
it's from.
ties it to trips generated from specific
Yes,
parameters?
and this was on another case, I believe it was last week or the week before. I don't believe it was in front of you, Madam Hearing Examiner, it was in front of the other hearing examiner, but
Here, that's a staff condition.
yeah, the staff condition talks about the development intensity is limited to 265,000 square feet of retail and 100,000 square feet of mini warehouse based upon the ITE trip generation manual in effect at the time of local development order. We just think that condition is redundant because obviously the master concept plan and the zoning resolution limits the square footage, limits the uses that are approved in the zoning. I mean, we don't need another condition just spelling out what everything else already approves. When we come in to do a traffic study, we have administrative codes that dictate what we have to use for trip generation. ITE is a fluid document. It changes. In fact, now, with the 11th edition of ITE, it's actually an online document. So as ITE gets new data into their headquarters in regards to trip generation, they put that data into the 11th edition online, and it updates the 11th edition on their online portal. So as I do new traffic studies using the online trip generation, I may get new trip generation data using the 11th edition today that I didn't get when I did a traffic study 3 months ago utilizing the same 11th edition. Whereas the 10th edition was a printed manual, it didn't change until the new edition came out. So ITE continuously changes. So trip generation is continuously changing. Banks, for instance, used to be one of the highest trip generating uses there was with a drive-through. Now, banks are considered a lower trip generation. Most people, I don't even go to a bank anymore. I don't remember the last time I actually went to a bank. I went to an ATM once, but maybe a few weeks ago. Most people do their banking online now. So trip generation of uses change as time goes on. Some increase, some decrease. So
The thing that makes me question the condition, and obviously I'll save it for Rob, is it used to be years ago they tried to put these conditions into their recommendations.
Yes.
And then we stopped it. We got away from that,
Correct.
the county. And now it's resurfacing, and I share your opinion that it's redundant, and it's not even needed as a safety backup because it's going to be examined again at the development order stage, and if there is some change, it's going to affect an site-related improvement, not the greater road network because of the way transportation is no longer regulatory. So
Correct.
I'm going to allow Rob an opportunity to enlighten us all on why we may need this condition.
thank you. That was our
I understand the issue with it.
okay, thank you. I think that wraps up my comments. If you had any other questions.
I do not have.
Okay, thank you.
That's it.
You want to do the 48-hour memo now or after the staff goes? That's what we have been doing.
Maybe we should wait until after staff has
Okay.
completed all their witnesses,
Okay,
since some of the issues seem to pertain to
transportation,
transportation.
okay.
I just want to circle back. I have a request for the oil well decommissioning documents that documents when that's been decommissioned.
We can resubmit that, but I have it in front of me, and what it says on the DP form is that the work began to cap the well in May 22nd, 2023, and they did a final inspection that the well had been plugged and abandoned June 5th of 2023.
And that's attachment G of the staff report.
Must have missed it.
And I have it here too, I can give it to you.
That's fine. If it's attached to the staff report,
The vacation information?
Oh.
Yeah, and they were plotted as residential.
And
okay, and then, no, that was answered, yes. Ready for staff?
Yeah, did you want the information from the vacation from the 90s?
Yes, let me have that. This will be applicant exhibit 2. And is this a road right-of-way vacation or a plat vacation?
Flat vacation. Oh, Did you want Ted to talk about the condition of the bridge, or you had raised that question with Mr. DeLisi?
Yeah, I did, but it occurred to me that it'll probably be a condition of development order if it doesn't meet standards. They'll have to improve the bridge to meet those standards. This is applicant, staff's PowerPoint. This will be staff Exhibit 2. Exhibit 1 is the staff report. Did she give you a copy? Yes, she did. Okay.
Ready? Good morning. My name is Beth Workman. I'm a principal planner in the zoning section. I've been accepted as an expert in the Land Development Code and Lee Plan, and I wish to do so today as well.
Yes, please proceed.
Thank you. The case before you is DCI 2023-00010. It's Sunniland Town Center Commercial Plan Development. The request Mr. DeLisi went over thoroughly. I want to make one correction to this slide as well as a staff report. The total site area is 33.3 instead of 34.9. It was on the original application as 34.9. The advertisement went out as 34.9, but it really is 33.3 acres in size. There are two different development options, which Mr. DeLisi went over. One is to permit the 265,000 square feet of commercial development along with 100,000 square feet of mini warehouse on the site, or to permit 100,000 square feet of commercial development with 100,000 square feet of mini warehouse and then 300 residential dwelling units.
So can that be any, I noticed there was no list of permitted uses. So my question is, can that be any type of residential development, single family, multifamily?
Correct. There's no, in their schedule of uses that they proposed, it can be anything.
Okay. Because there's no, the conditions and deviations and the, okay, well, let's continue.
If that's something that needs to be changed, that would be like an applicant question, because they cited multifamily in their presentation.
Yes, that's why I'm requesting clarification.
So staff is recommending approval with conditions. The property history, Mr. DeLisi went over, this has been approved. So if they decide to go forward today as it stands, they could go forward with the 33.3 acres of commercial plan development with the existing approval that you see before you with the development scheme. However, the problem is that there's code violations on both parcels. So the Sable Palm cluster has been impacted, as well as the preserve in the bottom, and then there's preserve that wraps around the eastern and northern portions of the site on the original master con. This is existing site conditions. So in order for them to go forward, they would still need to abate the violation somehow and still revise the master concept plan. Future land use category, central urban. Mr. DeLisi went over that thoroughly. Not going to belabor the topic. It is an urban core, heavily settled. Public services are available. It's in the mixed use overlay, as you see in the shaded pink purple for you. Mixed use overlay promotes various scales of intensity. It's part of that urban core to provide interconnections between uses, to provide retail businesses as well as residential, all in the same vicinity. And then Mr. DeLisi went over the density calculations, how you can you can double dip, so to speak, into the commercial portions can also, that acreage can also be calculated as the density for the residential portions, which is an advantage being in the mixed use overlay. It is in the Lehigh Acres commercial overlay area. So a policy 11.2.7, it promotes the commercial schools, parks, public facilities in this area, which their design is promoting that. The Sunshine Elementary School here, Lampstead has an ecological park that sits over here that's zoned RS1. So there is a mixture. He touched on 11.2.7 as it applies to them promoting doing mixed use, multifamily development in the Lehigh Acres commercial overlay area. The housing alternatives are looked at. So in the commercial overlay, a 1/4 acre and 1/2 acre lots are not what the Lee plan is promoting in this area. Multifamily is really what is subject to that Lee plan policy. The surrounding land uses, Mr. DeLisi went over thoroughly. That is bound by a Lampstead Canal to the north and to the western side of the property. That affects buffering because of the abutting definition in our land development code and what is required. If you're more than 25 feet wide, you're not abutting anymore. And the Lampstead canals are over 25 feet wide. The south property abuts the arterial road Lee Boulevard. There is a elementary school to the east, which plays into some of the consumption on premise requirements as part of the schedule of uses, as well as the residential to the west over here. This is a master concept plan. It's a little bit different than what was previously approved just because of those impacts to wetlands and the gopher tortoises in this area. The restoration is being done up in the northern part of the property for that violation. As Mr. Owen went over, it's in these areas right in here. The replanting of these areas will provide the screening and for compatibility from the residents to the north, even though there's no buffer required in this area. Schedule of uses. I just want to go over this a little bit. This is bar and cocktail lounges, nightclubs, and package stores. In the original zoning, there was a condition regarding the package stores. And it limited to them to the code, which is you have to be over 500 feet from a school or from residential uses. They also have nightclubs and bar and cocktail lounge that are in our code as having that 500-foot distance. So I kind of measured out 500 feet from the school, from this existing residential. So in these vicinities, the bar and cocktail lounge, the nightclubs, and the package store use would not be allowed. So in the staff 48-hour letter that we provided, the consumption on premise has been changed. So from package store that was originally condition 4 to consumption on premise to include the bars and cocktail lounges and nightclubs, as well as the single-family residential under private ownership, which is right out of the code. So that is something that we were concerned about just with the consumption on premise. Staff went over this with the applicant prior to doing any of this to kind of give them a heads up about the distance issue. And we did provide the strike through and underline in the staff's 48-hour letter that was sent in. I'm sorry.
Back. So anything that's not X'd out can host one of these uses.
Mm-hmm.
What about the remainder of the east side of the site, though? Because that looks like it's abutting the school.
This is abutting the school. They would have to demonstrate. I'm not sure what's going in here, if it's going to be multifamily or commercial, so.
Oh, I see. It's a large site, so they can just set back.
Yeah,
Okay.
and there's no deviation from that was submitted, so this is something that, you know, needs to be worked on a little bit. Staff provided that revision just as a protection to show compatibility and meeting the code because of that
We're going to
use.
go over the 48-hour letters after all
Correct.
the testimony is in. So we'll
Correct.
revisit that with the applicant.
So this site does have urban services provided. It is on a bus route. This is the site right here. We do have the sheriff's department right here. There's the fire department over here. It is on the bus route. It is close to a park, that ecological park to the west, which is owned by Lamps. It has a boardwalk. I have a note here about the letter of availability. The applicant has provided a new letter of availability that has the scope of work for the commercial. The original one just talked about residential. So the residential land uses for this, if it's proposed to be multifamily, it's going to need to provide the variety of housing types. The multifamily is going to provide the variety of housing types in this area due to the platted lots surrounding our single family. Mr. DeLisi went over that in detail. The prohibited residential development were physical constraints. There really aren't any physical constraints in this area. It's not in a coastal high hazard area. They're bound by the canals on two sides, the north and the west. The environmental portion of this is being dealt with through the restoration plan to abate the violation. Direct high density near shopping centers and close to parks and schools. This is located near some shopping centers across the street in Lee Boulevard, as well as schools to the east. You have Sunshine Elementary, as well as a private school further down Lee Boulevard on the same side as Sunshine Elementary on the north side.
Isn't the library close to this property too, on Gunnery, or?
Yes, it is. There's a library close by on this. I didn't have that on the overall aerial. It will protect the existing and future residential uses. On the western side, there are vacant residential lots north of that Lampstead property that are not developed. The canal bounds this property, as well as enhanced landscaping that is going in there for buffers that are part of the conditions of the zoning. There are some enhancements. And in that, I'll go over those a little bit in detail when we get to policy 6.1.6. So the original zoning that was approved, it was approved in 2006. Lehigh Acres community plan didn't exist. So Lehigh Acres followed 10-416D, which required anytime you have a commercial parking lot, a drive aisle, within 125 feet of a single-family residential use, which this did, you need to provide the 125-foot rule, as we call it, which is a 25-foot wide buffer with a wall set back 25 feet and landscaping on the outside of that wall. Well, then Lehigh Acres formulated their own community plan, and then the Land Development Code in Chapter 33, 1405, states that we don't look at 125-foot rule. We're doing abutting. If you're doing a commercial use that abuts a residential single family, then you need to provide a 30-foot wide buffer. This does not abut because of the canal and the definition of abutting. So no buffer is required in that as the code stands today. On top of all of this, you're in the mixed use overlay. And I went over this in detail in my staff report because you're kind of following a dancing ball through the code. So you're in the mixed use overlay, and mixed use overlay then trumps all of the codes. And mixed use overlay in 10-425 states that when commercial abuts single family, you have a 10-foot wide buffer. Again, the definition of abutting applies here. But the applicant has provided buffering in these areas to show compatibility against the single family. So we do have conditions in the zoning regarding some buffering that was shown on the master concept plan to make sure that that goes through at time of development
So
order.
the master concept plan exceeds codes and code in terms of buffering from residential.
Correct. Correct. So in policy 6.1.1, traffic and access will be go over later this afternoon. Just went over landscaping and screening and buffering. Again, mixed use overlay, right-of-way buffers and mixed use overlay are 5 feet. So on Sunniland and Lee Boulevard, 5-foot buffer. On the north side, there won't be a buffer. However, the restoration plantings are going in there.
And that looked like it was over 150 feet wide, that
Correct.
area.
Yes, for the detention area as well as the restoration. We went over adequate services and facilities and the impact on adjacent properties. The buffer is an addition to, it's an enhancement. Objective 11.2 is for the mixed-use developments that they're proposing to do with that multifamily and then the commercial, to insert the multifamily with the surrounding commercial, with the surrounding uses in this area to support the multifamily with workplaces, retail businesses, having internal accesses to reduce the trips. And then there's bicycle facilities. There is an existing sidewalk along this area. During the development order process, that will be looked at as well as the Lee Tram bus stop to see if it needs to be updated, if the sidewalks need to be updated or the bus stop needs to be updated.
Okay, just to be clear though, this master concept plan is proposing height limitations of 45 feet for residential multifamily and 35 feet for commercial, correct? Okay.
So the Lee Plan Policy 11.2.7, in the mixed use overlay, the calculation of density has been gone over. That's an important part of being in the mixed use overlay. Lehigh Acres community, we kind of went over the commercial overlay area, the sewer and water, the on-site preservation of indigenous plant communities. The applicant is proposing to preserve the indigenous that's been left on site, some of it, in that southeastern corner that is the Pine Flatwoods, as well as restore along the northern part of the property for the violation. So there were wetland impacts, there were gopher tortoise impacts as part of this violation. FWC as well as the South Florida Water Management District have closed out those violations. I don't even think FWC had a violation on this. I think it was all just the district had it for the wetland impacts. So that's all been closed out.
What does that mean? They paid a fine or something like that?
They investigated and abated it through what they did. I don't think they had to do anything but remove the nuisance debris that was left in there. So the public information meeting was held June 22nd in 2023 with the community. So environmental and surface water, the open space area is, the indigenous open space area is upland. It provides the requirements for the indigenous that's required per the mixed use overlay. We're in the mixed use overlay. It's a large project. Mixed use overlay in 10-425 requires 20% open space with 10% represented as indigenous. So in the old zoning, it was 40% open space for residential and 30% open space for commercial. We have a reduction due to the mixed use overlay that has happened. Brent went over the surface water management system and how that will be designed, so I'm not gonna really belabor that topic. Going over the violations. So there are 2 violations that were issued on the site in 2021. Mr. Owen went over them. There was nuisance accumulation, land clearing without permits, and then the lack of compliance with the resolution. There are 2 notices of violation that went out. Those notices of violations are attached to the staff report with what needs to abate the violation. The condition number 8 has that section of what needs to be replanted in there. I know we're going over the 48-hour letter later on. The 48-hour letter from the applicant has some issues with condition 8. Mostly timing and reiteration of code.
Mostly timing and what?
And reiteration of code for monitoring and the irrigation section. So I'm not going to belabor this, but what staff would like to do is work on these with the applicant, because the condition that you see in the staff report is a consistent condition that we have put on other zoning cases, one that was just issued yesterday, Kelly Road. It's exactly the same condition. Tying the abatement to a limited development order so that we can get that limited development order looked at, get the violation abated, get it CC'd, it's done, and then a development order comes in for the development, the vertical. The problem that is happening on this case is that the master concept plan and where the abatement is happening is in a dry detention area that will not be designed until at such time the development comes in. So to do an LDO and put trees in these areas and dig a dry detention just thinking about what you would possibly need and then have to go in and impact during the development, whatever the district, whatever happens with the South Florida Water Management, presents a problem. And staff understands that. So we've started to work on a revision to do the first development order. Since there are two violations, one is on this side and the other is on, the east and the west side of Sunniland, we may need to write two separate violation conditions to represent this side for VIO 2021X and VIO 2021Z.
Right, that would be my preference.
So that it separates it, and it would be for the ease of the development order to come in. The development order would come in on this side, let's say, and then they would show in that first development order infrastructure, which would be the detention, and the infrastructure would include the abatement.
Meantime, a daily fine is accruing.
Correct.
Each day this goes on.
Correct. That's why in what was in the other case that was the issuance of that approval was yesterday, we did an LDO. Because then you can get the LDO in, get that abated, get it CC'd, stop the daily fines, and move on with whatever you're doing for your development footprint. We can't do it on this one because of the detentions, unless they know what the detentions are going to be and include that in the LDO. These things we don't know. So that's why staff would like to leave the record open to be able to sit down with the applicant and code enforcement staff with this condition and separate out. We've already started writing to separate these things because we have two violations on separate.
I have no problem with leaving the record open for that.
Because I understand what's going on in the 48. I totally get it. I totally understand the DO process, and I understand the dry detention and how that all meshes together. We need to get this thing abated because I've been working on this thing since 2020. So I would like to see this abated. So that's my 2 cents on the abatement for the violation.
So I need a point of clarification on the north area where this restoration is to take place.
Mm-hmm.
The restoration is going to be part of the abatement. It's also going to serve as water management area. So on both sides, it's going to serve as water management area?
According to what we have on this master concept plan, this is dry detention and restoration. Dry detention and restoration.
And then that other piece is wet.
This right here
Yeah.
is straight up dry detention and no restoration. And in my staff report, in the section for outstanding issues, I wanted this to be labeled as abatement and this to be labeled as abatement, and then have the VIO cited for each on the master concept plan so that in the future we know that that's an abatement area, but the condition will serve as such. So anyway, but staff understands where the applicant's coming from.
So the condition, you're asking the record to remain open for a condition to be drafted and possible relabeling of the master concept.
Correct. And it would be two separate conditions, sort of saying the same thing, but citing the violations and the parcels. Because the other thing that comes into play, we can say parcel 1, parcel 2, but then we have out parcels down here. And excuse me, the problem is we have out parcels coming in on our informals. If an out parcel comes in first, they're going to have to do the restoration. See what I'm saying? So the anchor may not come in first. And we've had 2 informals on this piece and a piece over here for uses.
Which pieces?
This piece, and I believe it was this piece.
So there's, how do I want to say this? So it's not desirable from staff's point of view to make them achieve restoration on whatever site comes in first? It's preferable that it happens in this area? Is that why you're willing to delay correction of these 2 violations?
We would like an LDO to come in to abate these violations, but with the design and where this is located and what the applicant is saying, the detention areas are not going to be designed.
Right, so my discomfort is the indefinite postponement of addressing these 2 violations, which there's probably already a lien on the property judging from the date of the violation. Because I think if they don't define a cruise for 3 months, the county places a lien on the property. So this property is basically liened, these 2 parcels on the north are liened until these 2 violations are addressed. But I guess that's an applicant issue.
Yeah, and I mean, going through the review of this prior to sufficiency, we have looked at various areas to get the restoration away from this and move it so it would blend in with this over here, working around the oil well, because the oil well was out of it and now it's in it. So, and this is where we landed to put the abatement trees.
I'm curious about the ability to have the oil well back in it, quite frankly, because it's really a non-conforming use in a CPD, and it's been discontinued more than 6 months at this point. And to seek to include it as a permitted use in a CPD, I question the legality of that, but that's, you know, I understand that's part of the 48-hour letter, and we'll have to discuss that more. But I don't see how you're able to include that use in a commercial plan development.
Yeah, and the discontinuance in chapter 34 prohibits this.
Right.
So yeah, it was accepted in this, the original Z06 zoning because it existed on site. We were allowing it to happen. And now with this amendment, we don't want to push something to more nonconformity, and it's against that discontinuance code. Plus, it's been plugged. So I don't agree with adding it back in. I took it out for that very reason. And then
I feel as though I'm legally constrained from including that in the list of permitted uses because it was existing only non-conforming essentially before, and
Correct.
it's been discontinued for more than 6 months. But we can talk about that more later, I guess.
yeah, and then just for the platted lot question, the very beginning of Dan's testimony, when you were like, what the history is, I believe it was 1961, it was platted. It was platted lots. And it was a board direction to then remove the plat. I have the OR book and page and everything on that. So it was a BOCC direction. I have people out that listen to these things and then research the questions that come up. So, thank you, Adam Mendez. So, okay, so then going on, I'm not gonna go over traffic that much because Rob's gonna be here. It is compatible as long as when the signalization warrant analysis is done at time of DO, they look at and however that rolls out. So he'll go over what the rub is with the 48-hour letter from the applicant versus what we proposed. Now, I made a mistake on the staff report by not including transportation's 2 conditions. They were analyzed in the staff report. They were in attachment Q of transportation's staff memo. It just didn't make it into the attachment S, which is in my 48-hour letter in the underlined version. So it's the second condition that is in the 48-hour letter from the applicant that they're disputing, and transportation is going to go over. The first condition that Ted talked about in transportation, I'm going to allow Rob to go over that. I understand where the applicant's coming from. I'm going to allow Rob to go over that a little bit more. I went over urban services and the locations. Now, the deviations, it gets a little confusing because deviation 1 for the water body setback was originally withdrawn in the original zoning. Deviation 2, we're recommending that get withdrawn because it doesn't apply anymore because of the Lehigh Acres Code, and now it's in the mixed use overlay, as I explained. And so those two things withdrawn, we weren't sure to label it deviation 2 or deviation 1 because deviation 1 is withdrawn in the original. Deviation 2 from the original we're requesting to be withdrawn, and deviation 3 or 2 in this is a new deviation.
Creating a new master concept plan, and this resolution is going to supersede the original resolution. My vote would be to call it deviation 1, but I will defer to whatever it is that you all decide, just agree on what it is.
Right, I'm okay with that. However, the master concept plan that's in the file right now still has 1 and 2.
Well, they're going to have to conform the master concept plan.
Correct.
At least where we are at the end of this hearing, leave the record open for that.
Correct.
And then perhaps based on what comes in after, before it goes to the board.
Correct. I'm with you all the way on that. The deviation that they're requesting that's new is to allow the indigenous native vegetation communities for that 50% of the open space to allow the restoration areas to be counted towards that. And we are in agreement with that. So that ties to condition 8. And so with that, staff finds that the application as it stands with the conditions that are in the staff report are consistent with the land development code and the Lee plan, and recommends approval as conditioned. And we'll go over the 2 conditions that need to be worked on, the transportation as well as, I think it's condition 12 and then condition 8. And then the COP stuff. And the master concept plan.
The abatement condition has to be addressed and resolved in one way or the other, and this transportation condition must be addressed and resolved in some way. And it sounds like both those things are achievable before we close the written record at least. And then at that point, what I would like is complete conditions and deviations, however they're numbered, to be provided to me for the purposes of preparing my recommendation.
So it'd be condition 8 and condition 12. And then a new master concept plan showing the deviations, whatever we're going to call it. And then labeling the restoration areas as abatement with the violation case numbers. And then that's all I have.
I've got a couple questions.
Sure.
If you go to your slide 8 on the master concept plan,
Oh, God,
there was a discussion about what kind of dwelling units. In the master concept plan, at least what I read is that it limits it to multifamily. And
Correct.
in your list of permitted uses, you limited dwelling units / multifamily parcels to only.
The schedule of uses says multifamily?
Yeah.
Okay. It was a question from the hearing examiner.
Yeah, I just wanted to clear that up.
I got confused because of the way the request was worded, I guess, is what created the confusion.
Yeah, I just wanted to clear it up so that there wasn't a concern
you.
about
And
whether
this-
we misrepresented what we intend to do.
And if developed, the multifamily residential can be up to 45 feet in height.
Under the property development regulations. I know you were looking at the graphic that Beth had with the,
Did you see my, spoiled?
I put that in there on purpose.
You got our
Know
attention.
it.
The other question, I have a question is in regards to, there's been a lot of discussion about the violation. The violation was not caused by the applicant, correct?
If you want me to go in the whole story
No,
of
I
this
just
case,
want to make it clear that it's,
I've been through two planning firms, two different engineers. Previous owner was the violator, the current owner is not. We are trying to abate this violation. The violation, the VIOs that were cited, the 2021s, were not originally issued to the original owner. We were trying to work with the owner, and we couldn't get anywhere, and so the notice of violations went out. And that starts the time clock.
and there's no bad guys in this room.
Correct. It's not the current owner, but
The goal is abatement.
Yeah.
The
Correct.
goal is not to penalize. We're trying to achieve
Correct.
abatement.
I just didn't want you to think we were the bad guys.
If good faith purchasers for value correct the violation, I'm sure that will bode favorably for you in a lien mitigation hearing. I just
and
wanted to
staff,
point out that we have a daily fine accruing, that's all.
There isn't one, as I understand it.
no, there isn't anything going on right now. No, there's no, I believe there's no lien.
I would double check that.
From staff's perspective, we're trying to get a consistent code violation condition in these zoning
Oh, so
cases.
this hasn't even gone to hearing.
This has not.
Because we filed the application.
And that is the original owner. We were under the direction of trying to
How much
correct.
time are we going to allow to go forward before this thing goes to hearing if it's not addressed?
I can't answer that question. But it's the goal of staff to have a consistent condition to go on these zoning cases with these violations. But
I'm thinking
it's case by case.
this might be more suited to a code enforcement agreement where there's that provision under the code where you enter into like a contract with the county and it outlines the terms of how and when it's going to be addressed.
Except that
And
we've
then the
worked a lot.
condition would refer just to the agreement between the county and,
I think they've spent a lot of time and a lot of meetings to get to this point to, while we didn't agree with the verbiage in condition A, we did agree with getting to what the staff and the colleges agreed to in regards to what needs to happen out there.
We're in a good spot. We just, it's the language in the condition.
okay, well, you will have an opportunity to work that out.
Okay, I have one more question. Slide 10, you have the graphic with the X's, and you can't have bars and cocktail lounges. But
Oh, I'm
my
like,
question is, if you have a restaurant, it's a bona fide restaurant, but inside the restaurant they serve alcohol, are you prohibiting that?
no, that is, it's explicitly in the code that you can allow that.
I just
You can
wanted
have
that
a
to be
restaurant with, so like, there's a particular use that wants to go in, oh God, in the location that we had an informal, they would be allowed to have that if they were within 500 feet, because they serve food. The bar and cocktail lounges, it's in 34-1264. It talks about how to disseminate between the two.
And I would,
Hotels
I just
with a cocktail lounge
Right.
are okay, because it's an accessory use.
If you want to propose more detailed language for that condition, I will entertain it.
okay. Thank you.
I just don't want it to get gigged at time of DO
No, I just don't
for
want there to be
something.
confusion later, so
Yeah.
maybe we can,
Okay,
No ABC liquor store on those 2 out parcels.
got it.
3 out parcels.
anything else, Neil?
No, I think those are it for now, thank you.
That's all I have.
Okay, members of the public, we have concluded applicant's presentation and staff, we're halfway through staff's, more than halfway. There's one more witness that is going to be testifying on behalf of staff pertaining specifically to transportation issues. If you wish to speak now, your concern does not pertain to transportation so much, you want to speak now and then leave and not come back after the lunch break, I invite you to come forward. Otherwise, if you prefer to wait until all the testimony is in the record, You can speak after, but you can't speak both. So I'm going to ask anyone who's here right now from the public that would like to speak now. Is there anyone that would like to speak now? I've got Rahim Ahmadi.
I'll speak after.
Okay. Derek Felder.
I can speak now.
Okay.
We got a meeting at 12:30 with commissioners, so.
State your name for the record, please.
Derek Felder for the record. Staff brought up the Lehigh Acres Architectural Review Board meeting that was held June 23rd, 2023. At that meeting, the motion that was made from a recommendation of that board was approval with the stipulation of commercial only if possible. The viewpoint is that Lehigh has enough residential and also Lehigh has enough storage units. We lack commercial. So if there's a way to make it 365,000 square feet of only commercial, that was the motion. If that's not possible, then they, the residential, the mixed use apartments, it does give a variety of people that need apartments versus homes. But again, the storage units are not needed. There's already like 4 more that are currently being developed in Lehigh that are not built yet. The gopher tortoise burrows that were buried over during the land clearing that was done illegally, there was nothing, no fines or anything was done for those gopher tortoises that were buried over and killed. So that was a question if there's anything that happened from that. If it does go forward with the residential, whatever we can do to have walkability around the site between the residential to the commercial developments, or also it was mentioned about to the school, if that's at all possible. The oil well, if it's not being used, it'll never be used. It's already capped. Somehow involve that site to be, part of the development, whether it becomes a park or something, and then just have a wishing well over the top of the cap. I don't know, but to just keep that, I don't know how big it is, 100 foot by 100 foot square of vacant land because it's in a well, just doesn't seem to make sense to me if it's never going to be an oil well ever again. And lastly, the gopher tortoise burrows that are on site on the survey map, it would be nice if they could, the preserve areas could include those, which it doesn't seem like it really is. The preserve that's being preserved has like 4 burrows maybe. The ones that were included up in the abatement area where it was already cleared is pretty much useless because they were probably demolished with the land clearing. Unless I'm wrong on the timing of that survey. So was that survey done after the land clearing had been done, or was that before? And he had mentioned about the relocation sites of gopher tortoises, that it's Arcadia and other sites. I know this is nothing that you guys can do or anything, but it'd be nice to see if we can get use of local sites for these relocation. Like I live with a gopher tortoise preserve right in my backyard within my community over in Town Lakes. There might be 2 gophers that live in that preserve. Could more gophers be added to that preserve and keep them more locally and enhance our environment within our community, in a Lehigh local basis? I think that's all I have.
Thank you. Deborah Wilkinson, would you like to speak now? Or would you prefer to wait?
I'll wait, thank you.
Okay. And Marcia Ellis?
I would prefer to wait.
Yes? Okay, fine. So I'm going to pause the hearing now, and we will resume at 1 o'clock.